There is a statistical pattern that exists in our society right now. It is a pattern that sits in the living rooms of millions of broken families. It is a pattern that keeps family court lawyers rich and good men sleeping in empty apartments. But nobody discusses it openly. If you bring it up at a dinner party, you're called insecure. If you mention it on social media, you're labeled judgmental or misogynistic. We have created a culture of silence around the single most important predictor of relationship success. But I am not talking about this today to judge anyone. Moral judgment is useless when we are dealing with cause and effect. I am talking about this because understanding patterns is the only way you can make better decisions about who you build your life with. If you ignore the weather forecast and walk into a storm, you don't blame the rain, you blame yourself for not looking at the data. Here is the data that the modern world wants you to ignore. Women with extensive dating and sexual histories have a significantly higher probability of ending up as single mothers. Now, before you react, understand this. Not all of them. It is not an absolute rule. There are always exceptions to every statistical model. But the correlation is strong, it is measurable, and it is undeniable. And when you stop listening to what society tells you should be true, and you start examining the psychological and neurological reasons behind why this happens, it starts to make perfect sense. This isn't about these women being bad people. It's not that they don't want stability. In fact, if you ask them, 99% of them will tell you they are desperate for a stable family. They want the house, the husband, the peace. But wanting something and having the neurological capacity to maintain it are two very different things. There are specific psychological factors, deeply ingrained behavioral patterns, and consequences of past decisions that make it extremely difficult for a woman with a high partner count to maintain a stable long-term relationship. Today, we are going to break down 5 specific connections between extensive relationship history and the probability of single motherhood. We are going to look at how her brain processes emotional bonding after multiple sexual partners. We are going to explain why she frequently, almost compulsively, chooses men who are completely inadequate to be fathers. And we are going to look at the doom loop, how her past creates a cycle that is nearly impossible to break without serious, professional intervention. But there is something else you need to understand, something that is critical for you as a man. We are going to answer the question, why do high-value men, intelligent men, successful men, men with options never seriously consider this type of woman to build a family with? And why, when they do interact with her, is it only for temporary enjoyment without commitment? I am going to explain everything. I am going to give you the roadmap that society hid from you. But first, to understand the software, we must understand the hardware. We need to understand something fundamental about how human bonding works that completely changes this conversation. Let me start with basic bonding science. This is not opinion, this is biology. This is how the human machine is wired. When you have sexual intimacy with someone, your brain and her brain releases a cocktail of very specific neurochemicals. The 2 primary drivers here are oxytocin and vasopressin. You have heard of them. Oxytocin is often called the cuddle hormone or the love drug. Evolutionarily, this mechanism has a very specific purpose. It exists to form stable pairs that can raise children together. Nature does not care about your fun. Nature cares about survival. Human infants are incredibly vulnerable for a very long time. For a child to survive in the harsh environments of our ancestors, it needed 2 committed parents, so nature developed a chemical bribe. Sexual intimacy is designed to create deep glue, like emotional bonds that keep a couple together through the sleepless nights, the stress, and the exhaustion of years of child-rearing. When that bond is fresh, it is incredibly powerful. It blinds you to flaws. It makes you feel like you and that person are one entity. It is the biological glue of the family unit. But here is what happens when you have multiple sexual partners in a short period, or a long string of partners over years. That bonding mechanism, that delicate biological machinery begins to deteriorate. Think of it like a piece of high-quality adhesive tape. The first time you use it, stick it to a wall, it bonds instantly. It is strong. You can hang a picture on it. It holds weight. It is secure. Now, imagine you rip that tape off the wall. It hurts. It leaves a mark. But then you try to stick it to a second wall. It still works. But maybe the edges peel a little. It's not quite as flush as the first time. Now, do that 10 times. Do it 20 times. 50 times, by the 50th time, that tape is covered in dust, debris, and residue from the previous walls. It has no stickiness left. You can press it against the wall as hard as you want, but the moment you let go, it falls to the floor. This is exactly what is happening in the human brain. Your brain was not designed to bond and unbond repeatedly to dozens of times. It is traumatic to the neurochemistry. Each time you sexually bond with someone, share that vulnerability, and then it ends. That mechanism weakens slightly. You build up scar tissue, you build up defense mechanisms. After enough cycles, the capacity to form deep, blind, all-consuming lasting bonds is seriously compromised. This isn't a moral judgment. I am not standing here acting like a priest telling you what is a sin. This is neuroscience. It affects both men and women, but it affects them with different consequences in the context of forming a family and hypergamy. When a woman has fragmented her ability to bond, she enters a state of emotional numbness. She craves the feeling of the bond, but she can no longer sustain the chemical production to keep it. This leads us directly to the first major connection between her past and your future risk. So, the first connection between extensive relationship history and single motherhood is this neurological difficulty in forming deep and lasting bonds. This makes it extremely difficult to maintain a stable relationship when the initial chemicals fade. A woman with a history of multiple partners frequently describes this phenomenon to you, but she doesn't use scientific terms. She uses emotional terms. You have likely heard these phrases before. She says, "I don't feel that spark. I love him, but I'm not in love with him. Something is missing. I just feel numb." What she is really describing is a damaged bonding mechanism. Here is the typical scenario. She meets a good man. He is stable. He has a job. He is kind. He would be an excellent father. He is suitable in every logical way. But she doesn't feel that intense, overwhelming rush of connection. Why? Because her receptors are fried. Her capacity to feel that connection is compromised by a history of repeated bonding and unbonding. She has desensitized herself to the very thing she needs, so what does she do? She sabotages it. She ends up leaving him, or she cheats, or she never fully commits, keeping one foot out the door, searching for that intensity she used to feel with her first few loves. And here is the cruel irony, the tragedy of this situation. The intensity she is searching for wasn't deep love. It was novelty. It was the dopamine spike of a new conquest. It was the chemistry of the unknown. But after enough experiences, after enough bodies, even novelty stops producing that chemistry intensely. The threshold for excitement gets higher and higher. It's like a drug addict chasing the first high. They never get it back. So she finds herself in a predicament. She may decide to have a child because her biological clock is ticking. She finds a man. Maybe she even marries him. But she cannot maintain the relationship with the father because that deep, adhesive tape bond necessary to navigate the difficulties of raising a child together never fully formed. The moment the baby arrives and the novelty of the relationship wears off, she looks at this man and feels nothing. The initial chemistry disappears as it does in all relationships, but unlike a woman with a preserved bonding capacity, there is no underlying bedrock of deep attachment holding them together. There is no glue. So sabes det so. When the sleepless nights come, when the stress hits, when the finances get tight, she detaches, she walks away, or she pushes him away until he leaves. And the result, another child raised in a home without a father. The spark she was chasing burned the house down. The second connection is about the criteria she uses to choose partners. We have to look at her selection algorithm. A woman with an extensive relationship history didn't get there by accident. It is usually the result of a pattern of choices, and frequently, these women choose partners based on intense physical attraction, excitement, adventure, and social dominance. Traits often associated with the dark triad of personality narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. She prioritizes the tingles, the excitement, the unpredictability. She has spent years training her brain to associate anxiety with love. If a guy makes her anxious, if she doesn't know where he is, if he treats her poorly, her brain interprets that stress as passion. She has not been selecting men based on the qualities that make a good father: stability, stoicism, responsibility, family orientation, patience, self-sacrifice. Those traits are boring to a brain addicted to chaos. After years of making relationship decisions based on chemistry and drama, That pattern is deeply ingrained. Her brain associates attraction with a certain type of man, exciting, unpredictable, and frequently emotionally unavailable. So, let's play this forward. She gets to her late 20s or early 30s. She wants a baby. She gets pregnant. But who is the father? Is it the boring accountant who would have stayed no? It is frequently exactly that bad boy type she has always chased. The one who generates maximum chemistry but minimum stability. The one who is exciting in the short term but a terrible prospect for the long term. And here is where the tragedy compounds. The stable, reliable, family-oriented men. The men who would actually stay and raise the child do not generate that same intense chemistry for her. Her brain categorizes them as nice guys, as friends, as safety nets. She has spent years training herself to associate attraction with a toxic masculine energy that is incompatible with stable fatherhood. So she ends up having a child with a man completely inadequate to be a committed father. Maybe he is a player, maybe he is immature, maybe he has no career, but he gave her the spark. And when the inevitable happens, when he isn't present, when he cheats, or when he abandons the family completely because he never wanted the responsibility in the first place, she is left as a single mother. She will tell her friends, "I just have bad luck with men." It is not bad luck. It is a bad algorithm. It is a broken selection process that prioritized the thrill of the moment over the security of the future. This brings us to the third connection: unrealistic relationship expectations. Years of multiple partners frequently create completely unrealistic expectations about how a stable relationship should feel and function day to day. Think about the cycle of short-term dating. You meet someone. It is the honeymoon phase. The sex is constant. You go on dates. You're on your best behavior. You don't talk about bills. You don't talk about trauma. It is a fantasy world. When you spend years experiencing only this honeymoon phase with multiple partners hopping from one to the next as soon as things get real, your brain starts to believe that is what love is. You think love is the honeymoon. You haven't experienced what comes after the honeymoon, the building phase of commitment. The navigating of conflicts, the routine, the boredom, the mature love that is less intense but deeper and more resilient. Because every time that intense phase ended in her past, she moved on to the next person. She hit the eject button. She never built the muscle of endurance. So now, fast forward, she tries to build a stable family. She has a child. But suddenly, life isn't a honeymoon. It's dirty diapers. It's a mortgage. It's a husband who's tired after work and doesn't want to go out dancing. It is routine. A woman with this history often lacks the tolerance for the inevitable phase of less intensity. Her expectation is that it should feel like those first weeks with the new partners felt forever, and when it doesn't feel that way, she interprets it as a failure. She thinks, "I've fallen out of love. He's not the right one. I deserve to be happy." She interprets the stability of a healthy marriage as the stagnation of a dying one, so she ends the relationship or makes it impossible for the partner to stay. Initiating divorce or separation, she is searching for that intensity again. She is willing to break up her family to go find that feeling again, and the cycle continues. But now there is a child in the middle. The child becomes the victim of her addiction to the honeymoon phase. Now, let's pause the analysis of her psychology and look at yours. Let's talk about something you need to understand completely, something the media will never tell you. Why do high-value men, intelligent men, successful men, men who have built themselves up from nothing, never seriously consider this type of woman to build a family with? Women often scream that this is unfair. They say the past is the past. They say you're just insecure. It is not insecurity. It is not cruelty. It is not superficiality. It is intelligent protection of his future, his legacy, his emotional sanity, and his financial well-being. Because a high-value man understands something fundamental. Relationships are an investment. Marriage is the biggest financial and emotional contract you will ever sign. If you were a CEO looking to merge your company with another, you would do due diligence. You would look at the history of that company. If that company had partnered with 50 other companies in the last 10 years, and every single partnership ended in bankruptcy and lawsuits, would you sign the contract? Of course not. You would be fired for incompetence if you did. A high-value man knows he has options, and with options, he can afford to be selective. He can afford to choose a woman who go with a higher probability of being a stable mother, a loyal wife, a partner who builds instead of destroys. When a high-value man looks at a woman with an extensive relationship history, he sees massive risk. He sees compromised bonding capacity. He sees patterns of poor decision-making. He sees an inability to maintain commitment when things get tough. He sees an elevated probability of divorce, of infidelity, of constant drama. And he asks himself a simple question. Why? Why would I assume that risk when I have better options? Why would I bet half my net worth and the happiness of my future children on a statistical outlier? You, as a good man, as a man who is building something, as a man with standards, deserve to understand this. You are not bad for avoiding this type of woman. You're intelligent. You're protecting your future. Anyone who tells you that you should ignore history is advising you to ignore evidence in favor of blind hope. That is not a strategy, that is gambling. Here is the brutal but honest distinction that high-value men make. There are women for temporary fun, and there are women to build a future with. A woman with an extensive relationship history almost always falls into the first category. An intelligent man can spend time with her, he can enjoy her company, he can have physical intimacy, but in his mind, the categorization is already done. The file is stamped, temporary, not permanent, fun, not future, recreational, not foundational. Why? Because he knows that if she was in love with 50 men before him, his special value to her is statistically 0. He is just number 51. There is nothing unique about their connection. And when you build a family, you need to be unique. You need to be irreplaceable, not interchangeable. He knows that if she couldn't maintain commitment with previous partners, the probability that she will maintain commitment with him when the relationship becomes difficult is low, very low, and raising children is difficult. So, he doesn't bet his future on such terrible odds. He keeps her in the fun category, never introduces her to his family, never talks about the future, and when a woman who does qualify appears, he leaves without looking back. This brings us to the fourth connection, the inability to maintain commitment. Under stress, a history of multiple partners frequently indicates a structural inability to maintain commitment when relationships become difficult. And let me tell you, raising a child is probably the biggest relational challenge that exists on this planet. Think about it. If her life pattern was ending relationships every time they lost novelty or faced difficulty, why would that pattern magically change when a child arrives? Why would the stress of a screaming infant make her more patient if she wasn't patient before? Usually, it doesn't change. It accelerates the collapse. The first months after birth are incredibly stressful. Sleep deprivation, hormonal crashes, financial pressure, less time for the couple, less sexual intimacy. It is a period that tests even the strongest, most disciplined relationships. It is the storm test. A woman who never developed the muscle of long-term commitment, who always had the option to simply swipe left or move on when things got difficult, frequently cannot navigate this period. She lacks the grit. She starts to resent the father. She starts to feel trapped. She starts to fantasize about being single again, about the freedom she used to have. She makes it impossible for her partner to stay with her behavior, constant nagging, withholding affection, creating toxic environments. Or she makes the decision that she's better off alone. She convinces herself that the father is the problem. He doesn't help enough. He doesn't understand me, but the reality is, she never developed the capacity to sit in the fire and not run away. Raising a small child is an extended, difficult period. If her history shows she quits jobs, quits hobbies, and quits men whenever the fun stops, she will quit the family too. The fifth and final connection is more systemic. It is the self-perpetuating cycle, the doom loop. This explains why, once a woman enters the single mother category, it is so incredibly hard to get out, and why she often has more children with different men. Once she is as a single mother, her value in the relationship market for high-value men decreases significantly. We have to be honest about this. A stable, successful man with options generally does not wake up and say, I want to raise another man's child and deal with the drama of the biological father. It happens, but it is not plan A. So, her pool of options drastically reduces. The high-value men exit the building. Who is left? Lower value men, men with fewer options, men with less financial stability, men who are perhaps predatory or simply desperate, or men who are also in chaotic situations. If she gets pregnant again, it is frequently with that type of man, perpetuating the cycle. Additionally, she now has less time, less energy, and fewer resources to work on herself. She can't go to therapy easily. She can't focus on her career. She is in survival mode raising a child alone. This adds financial vulnerability, which adds stress, which makes her decision-making even worse. She might move in with a guy too quickly just to help pay the rent. The cycle looks like this extensive relationship history, leads to difficulty bonding, leads to selecting an inadequate partner, leads to a child and a breakup, leads to single motherhood, leads to reduced market value, leads to desperation, leads to another inadequate partner, leads to another child. Each iteration makes it harder to break the pattern. It is a whirlpool, and if you, as a man, try to jump in and save her, you don't pull her out, she pulls you in. So, where does this leave you? It leaves you with a realization that your instinct is correct. Let me tell you something you probably already knew in your gut, but society tried to reprogram out of you. Your instinctive rejection of committing to a woman with an extensive relationship history is not a flaw. It is an evolutionary safeguard. It is wisdom encoded in your DNA. Men for thousands of years avoided committing resources to women with extensive relationship histories because the odds of relational success are low. They knew, without modern psychology, that paternity uncertainty and instability were risks they couldn't afford, and you, the modern man, have the same right to protect your emotional, financial, and genetic investment. When society tells you to ignore history, it is telling you to ignore evidence of commitment capacity. It is telling you to bet your future against terrible odds. As an intelligent man, your correct response is no. Not all men have standards. Not all men think long-term. There are plenty of Captain Save-A-Hose out there who will rush in to be the hero. Let them. That is their lesson to learn. But you do not have to be one of them. That separates you. That makes you a man of true value who deserves a woman of true value. Why do you need to understand this so deeply? Because if you are considering a serious relationship or family with a woman who has this history, you need to know exactly what odds you are facing. It is not a guarantee of failure, miracles happen, but it is a significantly elevated risk profile. If she has multiple children from multiple fathers, that is a neon flashing sign of these patterns. It is not a character judgment, it is a data point. And if you plan to have children with her, you need to ask yourself honestly, what evidence do I have that this time will be different? Has she done serious, years-long internal work addressing these patterns? Has she been celibate and in therapy, or does she simply hope that because you are different, the result will be different? Because if she hasn't fundamentally changed her software, the hardware will produce the same output. You will end up as another father visiting your child on weekends, paying child support, while she repeats the same cycle with the next guy. And you, good man, a man with resources, man with value, deserve better than that. Let me say a truth nobody wants to hear. These patterns don't fix themselves with love. They don't fix with you being a good man. You cannot love her enough to repair her bonding mechanism. You cannot be stable enough to cure her addiction to chaos. Your role is not to be a rehabilitation center for broken women. Your role is to be a builder of a strong dynasty. So, what do you look for instead? You look for the green flags. Look for a woman whose history indicates a capacity for long-term commitment. Look for a woman who has past relationships that lasted years, not months. Look for a woman who, when a relationship ended it for mature, logical reasons, not because she lost the spark or got bored. Look for a woman who has a stable life, a career path, organized finances, healthy relationships with her own parents. Look for a woman with lasting female friendships. If she can't keep friends, she can't keep a husband, most critically. Look for a woman who is genuinely fine being alone. A woman who doesn't desperately need a relationship is a woman who is choosing you for the right reasons, not just to fill a void. As a man of value, you deserve a woman who saved her bonding capacity for you, who protected her ability to love deeply, who chose wisely. I spent years not understanding these patterns. I made decisions based on what society told me was nice instead of what evidence showed me was true, and I watched good men throw it all away. I was lost for years until I understood the code. I stopped attracting the wrong type and finally understood what to look for. And that is exactly why I put together something comprehensive for men who are serious about protecting their future. It's called the High Value Woman Code. Everything I'm talking about in this video, all the patterns, all the red flags, the subtle signs you miss on the first date, and the specific selection criteria that successful men use to find wives. Not just girlfriends, it is all laid out in detail there. You will find the link in the description below. This isn't just about avoiding pain, it's about securing your legacy. Because what I am going to reveal in that program goes far deeper than what I can share on YouTube. If this video showed you patterns you needed to understand or open now, if it validated that gut feeling you've been ignoring, do this, subscribe. Every week we discuss truths that protect your future, and comment below. I want to know your stance. Do you understand now why high-value men avoid this type of woman? Put only yes or no in the comments. Let the algorithm know we are here. The pattern exists. Statistics confirm it. Psychology explains it. And as a high-value man, your responsibility is to choose wisely based on evidence, not romantic hope, because the decision of who you have children with determines your quality of life for decades. Choose a woman who deserves your commitment. Choose a woman whose history indicates she can honor that commitment. Your future depends on it.